eso nomás, esa verdad sí.
Good evening, friends, and everybody in Omaha. Today, Expresión Latina lo va a hacer en inglés. So today we have a show in English. We have Mr. Dave Domina, who's running for Senate, and we're going to interview him, and we're going to have lots of questions that we've been recollecting for the community. And I want to introduce Mr. Dave Domina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And obviously we have Mr. Juan Carlos Veloso, also he's a panelist in this show.
Hello, Mario. Very excited about the opportunity of interviewing Mr. Domina with us. Is Domina? How
would you pronounce it?
I pronounce it Domina.
Domina.
Yes.
Okay.
I tried a case in court in New Mexico last year, and the judge pronounced it Domina for 3 consecutive weeks. I never corrected him.
I think that was good.
Domina, then good, wonderful. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
Do you have a question for him? Go ahead.
I think that we should start, Mr. Domina. This is the window to the Hispanic community.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you start telling us who you are and where are you from and your background?
I'll be happy to do that. Thank you. Well, I'm from northeast Nebraska. The county there is called Cedar County. It's directly across the river from Yankton, South Dakota. It's about 45 miles west of Sioux City, or South Sioux City in Iowa and Nebraska. Grew up on the farm. We raised hogs, milked cows, produced corn. I was the oldest of 5 kids, which means, of course, that I was sort of the hired man of the family, and enjoyed it. My brother stayed to farm, my youngest brother, and I left after graduating from high school in my small town, which is named Coleridge, and went to the University of Nebraska and then to the College of Law there. And I've practiced law in Nebraska since I completed my military service in the United States Army.
Very good. Very good.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you really are trying to run for Senate in these times, you know, when our democracy is declining, really. It's a fact. There's certain things that happen in this nation, and it is amazing we have someone like you that really still believes in democracy as I do, and is trying to do some changes, some good for the country.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. It is a difficult time for our country. This is the first time in the history of our country when we have had no restrictions on the amount of money that can be spent in a race like this, no restrictions on concealing the identity of the people spending that money. And I think there is a real danger that important positions like the United States Senate could go to the highest bidder unless citizens step up and try very hard to give the voters an alternative, which is what I want to do.
Very good.
Mr. Domina, you are a very successful lawyer here in town and throughout the state. What made you make the decision to run for the U.S. Senate?
Well, I'll tell you, I really realized when I was interested in and decided to get into this race that whoever the Republican nominee would eventually be, I knew enough to know that he would hold some values that I think are inconsistent with Nebraska and Nebraska values. I knew and know now for sure about my opponent, who's probably the most conservative of the bunch, that he opposes keeping Social Security, wants to privatize it, and if we were to do that, 44% of senior persons in the United States would be at risk that the bankers who would control the Social Security fund could lose it like they lost so much money in 2008 and 9. They would lose the government protection. The Medicare system would become a voucher system that would limit the quantity of care that would be available. I'm a veteran of the Army. Veterans' benefits to career military personnel would be diminished, and their pensions would be cut by adoption of the budget proposed by my opponent, called the Ryan budget. And in Nebraska, one other important thing, my opponent takes very large amounts of money for his campaign from an out-of-state interest that is completely committed to never again having a farm bill. Every single Nebraskan is touched by the Farm Bill, either the production or the nutrition aspects, and our state has to have a Farm Bill. So I decided to give Nebraskans a choice to stand up for those basic things and not surrender them to corporate interests.
Well, there's something that I would like to add to that, what you said. I was about ready to write a little article for a local newspaper, and this is what I come up with you. Maybe, perhaps you can enlighten me. Apparently, some votes count more than others. Those who vote with their millions of dollars have more influence and power than those who wait online for hours and hours to vote. Is that a fact?
Well, it doesn't have to be a fact, but it can be. What those millions and millions of dollars buy at the ballot box is the vote of the uninformed voter. The informed voter is not persuaded by that money. Now, after the election is over, those dollars can buy the votes of a United States senator or a congressman if that person isn't a person of deep character. So it's very important that voters be informed and engaged and not influenced by superficial things, and that they analyze closely the character of the people they're electing to fill these important offices.
Great. I have a question that is not in my note. Did you were surprised by the outcome that we had for the governor here in Nebraska on the primaries?
You're referring, of course, to the Republican primary. The Democratic primary was uncontested. I thought the race would be close between Mr. Bruning and Mr. Ricketts. I really thought until the last few days that Mr. Bruning would probably win it. And if I may speculate, and this is strictly my theory and not anything else, I think Governor Heinemann's endorsement of Mr. Bruning may have actually hurt Bruning. I don't think that Governor Heinemann is held in as high a regard today as he once was, and that may have turned out to have been a mistake by Bruning.
Good point. The other comment that we made in here the week before was that Mr. Bruning would use the immigration issue again to try to gain votes, and thanks God didn't work out this time, so we forget about that. Dr. Sanchez has some interesting fact about you.
It is, obviously, before I came tonight, I read, or I basically watched your website.
Thank you.
I read the whole thing to see your background and everything else. And there's something amazing that, as you know, Joni Ernst is running for Senate in Iowa. We all know that, right? And she used to experience castrating hogs as an experience that she said is going to help her deal with Washington spending.
Yeah.
I know you also have experienced castrating more than 2,000 animals, by God, right?
You know, it was coming.
That's true.
During your lifetime.
Well, by the time I got out of high school, Doctor.
Yeah. Are you also going to use your previous experience castrating animals in politics?
No. I will say this. I made a humorous radio ad about that during the primary because I thought it would be funny for people in the rural part of the state especially. And I did that much with it to help with name identification, but that's all.
It is funny. It is funny. We think.
And by the way, I don't believe that I used the name of the surgical procedure in my ad, Doctor.
Well, we are in this Latino program oriented to the Latino community, and immigration is one of the main issues right now. You know, we have been affected in different ways. Do we need a reform, an immigration reform? And if we do, what kind of reform it could be?
Yes, we absolutely do need immigration reform. We need it now, not later. And my position on immigration reform is, for me, intellectually very simple and informed by the principles that have founded and allowed our country to grow. I think that a person in the United States who came here with no wrongdoing except to be without documentation and who has been here, participated in our life and contributed to it in a thoughtful and helpful way, as usefully as is possible, should have an immediate opportunity to become a full-fledged naturalized citizen. There should be no second class. There should be no prolonged waiting period. immigration should be available and should lead immediately to naturalization and citizenship. My opponent thinks we should round up and deport 11 million people, and has steadfastly said that. There's nothing about the American experience from the time people first came here to join the original and Native Americans until the last decade or decade and a half that is consistent with that. And this moment of aberration in our history needs to come to an end.
What is inconsistent in that statement when you hear that they want to round up 11 million people and take them out of the country, that supposedly this comment came from the same party that pretend to be the family values party, and there is no consistency in those two issues.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that before. Maybe I can add to that. I think we mentioned about the family values, and I do believe in family. I'm sure we all believe in family values. I think it's important. It's a cell that is important to this country. But when you say family values, that means, and then you do completely the opposite. You divide the family. You send the father or the parent back to wherever country they came from. You're dividing the family. Not only that, you're going to economically do damage to our nation, to our country, or to our state, and to our taxes. Basically, because if you divide the family, lots of them are going to end up with welfare, Medicaid, and housing. If they were buying a house, they won't be able to pay it. Well, in other words, it's going to be not only divided family, but it's also economically, it's going to affect us, each one of us, because we have to pay taxes for that. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the economic argument for deportation is indefensible. There is no intelligent way to make that argument. You can start with a hypothetical number. Let's say it costs hypothetically $40,000 per person to go through the legal processes and the physical processes of deportation. That's a bill the United States and its taxpayers don't want to pay and shouldn't pay. Then you add to that oftentimes the person who's first removed is the breadwinner in the family. Yep. So you've crippled that family, then the community around it, then the state that surrounds that community, and ultimately the nation as a whole. Not only have you crippled the people who remain behind for the moment because they can't contribute the same way by paying their bills, maintaining their mortgage payments, and so on, you've diminished and sometimes destroyed the opportunities for the youth in that family. So it's a decades-long mistake that we're talking about. An economic decision alone that has a very long economic tail. And in addition to that, that kind of talk separates us as Americans. And we need to be talking about subjects that unite us as Americans. All of us as Americans. Immigration and immigration reform should be all about how to welcome people, how to assimilate people, how to grow our culture with new cultures, cultural values, and experiences. That's how we got to be the United States that could put a person on the moon and conquer polio and win 2 world wars. And we need to find our compass again.
Well, go ahead.
That is why it's so important to keep those family values that we were talking before, the land of opportunities. The land of opportunities for everybody, when you can have a dream and then that dream can come true in this country. Speaking about dreams comes true, we have the fair action, and there are a lot of people now in Washington asking for a similar kind of rule for either parents of dreamers or for those Latinos, Hispanic here who have not made any wrongdoing with the police or anything like that. Is that possible?
I think the question is a very technical legal question. Does the President of the United States have the executive order making authority to take that step? President Reagan took that step when he was in office a couple decades ago, at least to a very large extent. President Obama has executive decision-making authority to go most of the distance that you've described. He can't go as far as he could go with a congressional mandate, which is what he should have. But I think he is empowered to make some of that decision, and I think he may be may be disposed to make it too. And may I add to that and you inferred it in this question, and it was a part of the previous one. You know, the whole idea of family values requires that the primary focus be on keeping the family together
Absolutely.
as an intact unit.
Yes.
And families may have Democrats, may have Republicans, maybe both. There is no rule in our country that the father has to be a Republican and the mother has to be a Republican, or vice versa. In my own family, I'm pretty sure my parents enjoyed rounding debates about politics from time to time. When I came along, I contributed to the debate, and we were and are an intact and happy family. So this idea that family values has some partisanship about it is just as inconsistent with the American experience as this very sad aberration in immigration policy.
We share that thought, absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
Obviously, we talk about immigration and everything else. What are the possibilities or chances that the immigration reform is going to happen in this year or perhaps next year?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that the House of Representatives is likely to stall it this year and prevent it from happening. The House of Representatives is controlled by the political party with which I am not affiliated in this election. And I don't mind saying to you gentlemen, I prefer not to even mention the names of the political parties.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is it seems to me the feeling in our country is that those two words, Democrat and Republican, have taken on a tribal sort of value that shuts down thought and discourages examination of people as people running for office. But unfortunately, the House of Representatives is almost certain to keep immigration reform from happening this year. I think it's fair to predict that it will happen next year, regardless of who wins the election. And the question will be, what is the magnitude of the reform? Probably lesser if the Republican Party controls both houses of the Congress.
The thing is that we have talked about this before, how this may hurt the Obama's administration and the people who are running on this party because of this, because of the level of frustration not having this passed all of this year. I mean, not the first term, not the second term. There is a high level of frustration, and some of us think that some people is going to try to punish, kind of punishment on this reform not being achieved, and that may hurt the Democrats around the country.
I think it could, in that it may discourage people from voting. And what I really want to encourage your viewers to think about is this. At times of frustration, when people feel like their votes don't count, they actually have the greatest opportunity to use their votes to maximum advantage because there are fewer votes cast. So each one counts for more. So to you viewers, what I would say is this is the time to recognize your full power, because each vote cast can make an even bigger difference in an off-year election and can make a bigger difference because of the diminished number of votes that go with off-year elections and with frustration. And then the second thing I would say is, and again, this is an historic fact, as you gentlemen know and as your viewers know, there have been more filibusters and more efforts to prevent votes in the United States Senate specifically since this president took office than in the previous 100 years and perhaps even the history of the Senate. That indicates a partisanship that is not focused on the welfare of the people of the United States, but on a very intensively self-centered agenda that both parties need to set aside. You know, the office I aspire to is United States Senator for Nebraska. There is no Democrat word, no Republican word associated with that position. It's country, then state, no party.
Let's say you're elected senator. What would you do to change that?
You mean this divide that exists? Well, you know, I think this is a good way to start. Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa will all elect a new U.S. Senator this year. And when those three new senators, regardless of their party, are sworn in, those three senators will have more in common because of the geography and the people they represent. They'll have more in common with one another than with any political party or affiliation. If you start with that relationship and make 1-3 on areas where there are clear unities of interest, then grow it out from there and become acquainted with, other senators the way you become acquainted with people in a new neighborhood, I think you can make alliances. It's important to be looking for things upon which agreement is possible that have nothing to do with partisanship. And remember, it's a democracy. Nobody gets all of what anybody wants. It's a government of compromise.
That's why it's so
it's not
important.
my way or the highway, basically.
That's why it's so important to be flexible and to understand what is the best for the people.
The only time a public servant who is really a statesperson says it's my way or the highway is when the actual existence of the country is at issue. When
Yes.
Winston Churchill said, you know, we'll fight to the death and history will call this our finest hour, Great Britain was at stake.
Yeah.
But until you're at that point, it's a government of compromise. Solve the issue and move on. That's what our philosophy should be.
It is amazing that maybe perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, senators used to have their own mind. They will think, maybe talk to the opposite party and to come up with a compromise. But nowadays seems like we're electing senators that they don't think. They go out there to vote. They follow somebody else's instructions, or they have to vote certain ways because they're afraid that they might use money and other means to stop them from being reelected again.
It's certainly true, and I'm fortunate in that I am old enough now that I'm certainly not looking for a second career. I see this offer of my time and whatever talent I have for public service as being the kind of thing that I envision that our founders probably expected, which would be that adult men and women would live out their lives, grow to some level of maturity, and then contribute service in the form of congressional service or Senate service, but not make it a career.
Mr. Domina, by having you by the Cinco de Mayo parade here, having you come into this program and some other in the future, you are sending a message to the Latino community. What else are you planning to do in order to reach out to this Latino community?
Well, I've done a few things that I would like to tell you about, and we have plans for some more. I've tried to be as supportive as I can be of emerging Latino persons who are seeking office. I'm particularly interested in a young man in Lexington, Nebraska, who's a teacher there, a graduate of Northwestern University, valedictorian at Lexington High School a few years ago, 24 years old, who's running for the Nebraska legislature. He has a very tough race against a popular established businessman, and if he runs honorably, and I'm sure he will, and if he runs with a success that goes with honor, the vote count isn't so important, but I want to support and encourage him. I've reached out to some people up in Dakota City on the same basis and made some great friendships in South Omaha. We'll have an office in South Omaha so that people will know that we not only want to hear from people in the Latino community, we want to invigorate people by volunteering time and energy and helping us to get our message out. We will not have money from New York City and the millions to spend, so we need people on the ground to help us, including people in the Latino community, certainly, all across the state.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, obviously, the Latino community needs a lot of help, needs a lot of understanding that, yes, politics can actually be helpful to understand, to use a civic as a way to get your way sometimes. I think the Latino community needs to understand that voting is very important. And some of, I heard you say, well, what should we vote if we're not going to get anything out of it? Actually, it's not true. If you vote and your numbers keeps increasing, that means power.
It does.
People will start recognizing that too.
It absolutely does, and it doesn't require voting in a block. It requires voting. It requires making people aware of the power of a community. My function right now is to try to invigorate and to help empower this community. I hope that in 2 or 4 or 6 years, it's a matter of having all of that invigoration at a level where it commands more respect, maybe from typical politicians, and so the effort isn't to invigorate but to persuade.
I believe there's some changes happening in the community, Latino community. There's more people involved in civics, politics. There's more organizations now. We can name quite a few members of the community that actually are doing some leadership functions. And I can see that this is going to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to happen.
It is happening. It's happening in South Omaha, and it's happening across the state. It seems like slow progress when the things that are so obvious that need to be done aren't happening. Immigration reform being the most prominent example. But don't give up. Big change takes a long time, and it takes continuous effort.
Well, we have 1 minute left.
Dr. Sanchez, time is up, as always.
Yeah, 1 minute. What would you, any questions?
We need to give
final questions?
Mr. Domina your minute to...
Well, yeah, 1 minute to say something about it.
Well, what I would say then to your viewers really is to summarize what we just said. Of course, I would like to have you become interested and to vote for me. I think that I would, as a United States Senator, be a better and more effective public servant for the Latino community than my opponent. But what's really important to me is that you recognize the measure of your own power, recognize the authority of your vote, understand that involvement does make an enormous difference, even if it takes time, and then evaluate the candidates to see who's really sincere, who's really focused.
Very good. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to say good night.
Good night.